Good morning, everyone. In this module, we are going to discuss about menstrual cycle. Chapter 3, Human Reproduction, the main topic, menstrual cycle. So what do you mean by menstrual cycle? It is the periodical changes in the lining of ovary, oviduct, and uterus from menarche to menopause. And that cycle, periodical cycle, that repeats every month from menarche to menopause. So it is mainly seen in the female primates. Primates means apes, monkeys, and human beings. So here, during this period only, the female will be sexually active. That period only the ovary will produce the ova, and in that time only the chances of fertilization. And if fertilization occurs, means a pregnancy also can take place. And when the cessation of this menstruation, or we can say menstrual cycle, beyond that, the female cannot produce the young ones. So the the reproductive healthy period, or the ability of a female to produce the young ones, is in the menstrual cycle, or in the reproductive cycle duration. So the reproductive nature, or the reproductive capacity of the female, will start from menarche to menopause. So what do you mean by menarche? Means it is the first appearance of the menstruation, and menopause means the last appearance of the menstruation. So within that period, so it will start from approximately 12 years, and it will end up with maybe from 45 to 50, or even 55 years of age. So within that period only, the female will become sexually active and will be able to produce the young ones. And beyond that, the ovary will stop functioning. Uterus also will not be ready to receive the embryo. So with that, the reproductive capacity of the female will be lost forever. Then this changes. So every month in her oviduct, ovary, as well as in the uterus, there are periodical changes. Within the ovary, there is the follicular development will take place, and few follicles will start developing, and one or two will become mature, and ovulation will take place, and all these changes. And soon after the ovulation, the Graafian follicle will develop. The remnant part of the Graafian follicle will develop into corpus luteum. They will secrete sets of hormones. So all these changes, then it will become atretic. So these changes, what all? Periodical changes within the ovary. And simultaneously within the oviduct also, the endometrial lining will be peeled off. And in the uterus also, there is more and more proliferation of endometrial lining, and more vascularization, and more glandular secretion also takes place. So this will be repeated in every month. So that collectively we'll call it as the menstrual cycle. So when we move into the menstrual cycle more in detail, we can divide the whole period. It will extend maybe up to, in a healthy person, the duration of a menstrual cycle will extend up to a duration of 28 or even 29. It may even extend up to 35 days also. But normally in a normal female, 28 or 29 days gap only, the same periodical changes in the ovary, oviduct, and in the uterus, it will be repeated. And this whole cycle we can divide into 4 phases. The first phase, we'll call it as menstrual phase. There, the bleeding occurs. That means the cleaning of the uterine cavity, along with the even the endometrial lining of the uterus, the endometrial lining of the fallopian tube, and all will be peeled off. And that while detachment of the endometrial lining, the blood vessels also will break up, and they will detach. So the blood vessels will rupture, that leads to bleeding. Along with that, within the ovary, from the ovary, the over released, if they are not fertilized means the previous month, then that also will be discharged. The dead remnant part of the ovum also will be discharged, and that collectively it will be discharged along with the mucous lining in the form of a blood flow, and that process is called as menstruation. The duration of the menstruation is approximately 3 to 5 days. And soon after that cleaning process, the next phase we'll call it as proliferative phase or follicular phase. So why it is called as proliferative phase means within the uterus as well as in the ovary, in the fallopian tube, we can say the new endometrial lining will proliferate, because already the old one, it is detached. So new layer is formed. They will gradually start thickening. So proliferation. And along with that, the blood vessels also will start forming, and more glandular secretion, glandular formation, and the glands will appear the corkscrew shape. So the duration is from 6 to 13 days. And that is in the uterus and oviduct. So what is happening in the ovary is, within the ovary, from 6th day onwards, there will be enough and more primary follicles, and by the influence of pituitary hormones such as FSH and LH, FSH follicular stimulating hormone, which will the few follicles within the ovary will start absorbing more and more FSH, and as a result that follicles will enlarge, that gradually will transform into secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, and which one is receiving maximum, that will outgrow than the remaining. So one or two may reach the maximum size, and that matured follicle is called as Graafian follicle. The remaining follicles which are developed already, they will become attractive. So in this stage, it is called as, this stage will extend from 6 to 13 days, and that stage is called as proliferative phase, because proliferation of endometrium, and it is also called as follicular phase because the follicle also will develop, the development of the follicles. Not only that one, the developing follicle, which is absorbing maximum FSH and LH, they simultaneously, they will start secreting estrogen. So FSH also will be produced by the by the pituitary to the ovary, and LH also will be there. And as the absorption of the FSH and LH is increasing, the development of follicle will take place, and the developed follicles, follicles which are developing, which is transforming into tertiary and then Graafian follicle, that follicle will start producing estrogen. Then by the influence of estrogen, again and again, more healthy condition or the more thickening of the uterus also will take place. So the reproductive cycle as such, when we are saying, it is more dominated by or more controlled by the estrogen in a female. Then on the 14th day, the third phase, that is ovulatory phase. 13th day on itself, the FSH will suddenly surge, and sudden peak in the FSH secretion that will results in breaking of Graafian follicle, and on the 14th day, the Graafian follicle will rupture and it will release the ova. So that release of ova from the Graafian follicle, that process as such, we will call it as ovulation. Then soon after the ovulation, the ova will be taken into the fallopian tube, and then it will gradually passes through the fallopian tube. If sperm is there, means fertilization takes place. Otherwise, gradually within 1 or 2 or 3 days, it will degenerate. It will die and degenerate. But within the uterus, after the ovulatory phase, within the ovary, the remnant part of the Graafian follicle will transform into a yellowish mass. Then that phase is called as luteal phase or secretory phase. Why it is called as luteal phase? That means 15th to 28 days. It is called as luteal phase because that time only the yellowish glandular secretion gland will be formed from the remnant part of the ruptured Graafian follicle. And that structure is called as corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum, developing corpus luteum will produce the hormone that is progesterone as well as the estrogen. So this progesterone is essential for the maintenance of or proliferation of the endometrial lining within the uterus, and as well as it also suppresses the ovulation in the ovary. So this period is called as secretory phase, because the corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen. And at the same time, it is called as luteal phase because corpus luteum is retained. And in this phase, so soon after the ovulation, suppose if the released ovum, when it reaches the fallopian tube, if there is a sperm as a result of insemination at the time of intercourse, the ova may reach to the fallopian tube, and if they happen to meet, then there the fertilization can take place. And if the fertilization is taken place, means by the influence of progesterone, more and more endometrial layer thickening takes place, and the fertilized embryo will gradually move, and there the implantation will take place within the uterus. Once the implantation has taken place, means the corpus luteum will retain within the ovary throughout, even up to 4th month or 5th month of the pregnancy. There it will act as completely acting as the endocrine gland, and it will maintain the pregnancy as well as suppress the further ovulation. So it will mark by the stoppage of menstruation process. So the stoppage of menstruation indicates the beginning of pregnancy. And if there is no pregnancy, that means if there is no fertilization, means then by 25th day onwards, the corpus luteum will start regressing within the ovary. So once it starts regressing, the progesterone level and estrogen level will decrease, and that leads to the detachment of endometrial or rupture of endometrial layer from the uterus. So that will again result in the next cycle, that is the menstrual phase of the next cycle. So the entire process will repeat the duration of 28 days. That phase is collectively, we'll call it as menstrual cycle. So here we will go deep into each cycle in detail. The first phase is menstrual phase. It lasts for about 3 to 5 days. And if the ova is not fertilized, means corpus luteum regress from 24th day of the cycle. And this causes the decrease in the estrogen and the progesterone levels. This results in shrinkage of endometrium because there is no fertilization, and the progesterone also and estrogen level also decrease. So from the uterus and the fallopian tube, the detachment of the endometrium will start, and coiling and spasm of the arteries, the blood vessels also will regress, and it leads to the focal necrosis. That means the detachment of the endometrial layer and the regression of the endometrium. This necrosed endometrium is shed along with the blood vessels and the glandular secretions, and if any remnant part of the unfertilized egg is remaining there, means that also will be discharged in the form of blood flow through the vaginal tract, that is called as menstruation. Soon after menstruation, the next phase is called as proliferative phase. It is also called as follicular phase because the follicular development takes place within the ovary. The proliferative phase starts at the end of menstrual phase, that is 5th day to 14th day of the menstrual cycle. Here, by the influence of gonadotrophin, that means the pituitary hormones such as FSH and LH, which will increase gradually during the follicular phase and stimulates the follicular development within the ovary as well as the secretion of estrogen by the developing follicle. And in this phase, the primary follicles gradually transform into secondary, tertiary, and then into mature follicle, that is called as Graafian follicle. So the Graafian follicle will rupture by the end of the proliferative phase, or we can say follicular phase. That is approximately on the 14th day. So that 14th day, we'll call it as the ovulatory period or phase. So meanwhile, I am showing this graph because in this graph, we have included all the changes that occurs within the uterine lining as well as within the hormonal level inside the ovary or ovarian hormonal level, and the follicular developmental stages within the ovary, and at last the top, it is the gonadotrophin levels, that means the pituitary hormones. So when we start from the pituitary hormones, you can see here gradual increase in the level of FSH and LH after the menstruation. And on the previous day of the ovulation, that is on the 13th day, the sudden surge in the LH. That results in which one? The ovulation. And soon after the ovulation, the whole 2 FSH as well as LH will regress, or the level will decrease. The same way within the ovary, what all developmental stages occurs within the ovary, that is here you can see the menstruation period and all, there is no development of the follicles. Soon after menstruation, the 1 or 2, nearly few follicles will absorb more and more FSH as well as LH, and as a result, the few follicles will start developing. And out of that, 1 or 2 will outgrow than the remaining, and which one is developing faster, that will transform into secondary, tertiary, and Graafian follicle. So within the Graafian follicle or within the tertiary follicle, the developing follicle will start producing estrogen. So you can see in the third diagram, that is in the ovarian hormonal level, estrogen also gradually develops or will show the development or the increase in level. And on the 14th day, you can see the LH surge that results in rupturing of follicle within the ovary. And the ruptured ova or the released ova will be passed on to the fallopian tube. The remnant part of the Graafian follicle will transform into yellowish mass that is called as corpus luteum, which will retain if pregnancy takes place, or else by 25th day, the corpus luteum will transform into corpus albicans, which is the regressed corpus luteum. And if 25th day within the ovarian hormone ovary, you can see the corpus luteum itself is acting as the endocrine gland. It secretes more of progesterone and a little bit of estrogen. The role of progesterone is to maintain the pregnancy if the ova happens to meet with the sperm. And the progesterone level keep on increasing because the corpus luteum will retain within the ovary. Suppose if there is no fertilization, the ova will die within 1 or 2 days, and the corpus luteum gradually will regress within the ovary. And as a result, the estrogen level as well as the progesterone level also will decrease. And what is happening actually within the uterine lining, you can see at the beginning of the cycle, the cleaning of the uterus. That means the endometrial layer will be peeled off. Along with that, blood discharge also will take place. More of mucous lining also will be cleaned out. And that process is called as menstruation. Then from there onwards, 6th day onwards, gradual increase in the proliferation of the endometrium. And if the fertilization has taken place, means corpus luteum will retain, as a result, more and more progesterone will be secreted that will maintain the pregnancy. So more and more proliferation of the endometrium, which will support the pregnancy. Suppose if there is no fertilization, means the corpus luteum will regress by the 25th day onwards, and that marks the degeneration of the detachment of, or you can say regression of the endometrial layer. So the whole periodical changes that occurs in the ovary, oviduct, and uterus is collectively, we call it as menstrual cycle. So here we will move on more into ovulatory phase. So ovulatory phase is on 14th day, and as a result, because within the follicle, within the ovary, the follicles are developing. That follicles will take more and more LH and FSH. And on the 13th day, the LH surge will take place. And as a result, more and more LH is absorbed, and the Graafian follicle will rupture, and it will release the ova. That process is called as ovulation, which happens at the 14th day. Then the last phase is called as luteal phase, or it is also called a secretory phase, because in the last phase only the corpus luteum is retaining, is present, and it is acting as secretory in function, which secretes the progesterone. Hence, it is also called as secretory phase. So it will last around 15 to 28 days. So when it happens, that is soon after the ovulation, the empty follicle, the remnant part of the Graafian follicle will change the color into yellow color, and it becomes an endocrine gland, and that is called as corpus luteum. It continues to secrete estrogen and more of progesterone. The progesterone results in the endometrial thickening of the uterus lining. And if the ova happen to meet with the sperm in the fallopian tube, then that results in the fertilization, and starts the formation of zygote. The zygote gradually undergo cleavage and develop into early embryo. Soon after that, it will go on to the, it will move to the uterus, and there it will get implanted. So if the implantation has taken place, means that marks the pregnancy period. And embryo will release hormones to preserve the corpus luteum. So corpus luteum will maintain, which will secrete more and more progesterone and more endometrial thickening. So when we discuss more about corpus luteum, the corpus luteum, the word meaning itself, it is yellowish mass. And it secretes a large amount of progesterone, which is essential for the maintenance of the endometrium, which is necessary for the implantation of the fertilized ova and maintenance of the pregnancy. During pregnancy, all events of the menstrual cycle will stop, and as well as the menstruation also will stop. So the stoppage of menstruation indicates the starting of pregnancy. In the absence of fertilization, the corpus luteum will degenerate, and this causes the disintegration of endometrium, leading to menstruation, marking the new cycle. In human beings, menstrual cycle ceases at about 50 or 55 years of age, and this is termed as menopause. So cyclical menstruation is an indication of normal reproductive phase, and it extends between menarche and menopause. So here is the pictorial demonstration of what all changes that taking place within the ovary. So here you can see that the markings 1, 2, 3 and all, that is the developing follicles. Then it will develop, and by the influence of FSH and LH, Graafian follicular development, and on 14th day LH surge ruptures the ova, rupturing of or release of ova from the Graafian follicle. Then the released ova, then the remnant part of the Graafian follicle will transform into yellow, maximum on the 25th day at corpus luteum. And 25th day onwards, the corpus luteum will regress. So that is ovarian changes. Here on the right side, we have marked the changes that occurs in the uterine lining. So the beginning of the cycle, the endometrial layer is peeling out along with the blood discharge, and that is called as menstruation. Then from 6th day onwards, the gradual proliferation of endometrial layer, simultaneously the blood vessels and the glandular secretion. It will continue till the 28th day. And if pregnancy takes place, means it will continue throughout, more and more proliferation. And in the down region, we have represented the hormonal level of pituitary. So here the pituitary hormones, two hormones only, FSH and LH. So 5th day onwards, gradually increase in the FSH and LH. And the LH will surge suddenly on the 13th day or 14th day. And as a result of LH surge, the rupture of Graafian follicle and release of ova. And soon after that, the FSH and LH will decline. And the last graph, it shows the role of progesterone and estrogen. So here the estrogen is slowly starts developing, that is the developing follicular developmental stage. By the influence of FSH, more and more follicles will start developing, and which follicle is developing maximum, that follicle will start, the thecal layer of that follicle will start producing estrogen. So there is a hike in the estrogen in that time. And after ovulation, sudden dip in the estrogen, and again there is increase. And the corpus luteum is maintained or corpus luteum is attaining the maximum size, it is acting as the endocrine gland. There it secretes more of progesterone. So you can see sudden increase in the progesterone at the corpus luteal period or luteal phase. And along with that, estrogen also will be secreted. And again, if fertilization takes place, means it keeps on increasing. And if there is no fertilization, means the sudden decrease in progesterone as well as estrogen. Simultaneously, the corpus luteum also will regress. The next cycle will begin. So with this, we have concluded almost all the cyclical or periodical changes that occurs in the reproductive cycle. So the reproductive cycle extends from menarche to menopause. So every month this menstrual cycle will repeat by the duration of 28 or 29 days. The menstruation will stop by the beginning of by the pregnancy, and again it soon after the pregnancy and childbirth, approximately 6 months, there can be stopping of menstruation. Again it will start developing. So with this, we have concluded today's topic. Thank you for listening.